Okay, guys, we are going to do Chapter 8, Lesson 7. We have pages 589 to 594. Put your name on it and put your staple right there. All right, so today's lesson, hands-on. All right, we're going to be basically shading stuff in today to do this. The question, the essential question, as we always have, are how are factors and multiples helpful when solving problems? So what we're going to do is we're basically going to be focusing on using these base 10 blocks or base hundreds. And so we have to convert our fractions into one of those numbers in order to shade in the correct amount of squares. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, use models to write fractions as equivalent decimals. So we're taking a fraction, which is like 1/2, and we need to make it into a decimal. So we're going to write 1/2 as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 10. So the goal is to get our denominator to have a denominator of a 10 or even 100 today. All right, so that's what we want to think about, is having a denominator of, again, either a 10 or 100. So we have 1/2 as our original fraction. And if we wanted to have a 10, like we did on the last chapter, we have to decide, well, what are we going to multiply 2 by to get to 10, and that was 5. So what do we do? The bottom number we got to do by the top number. So 5 times 2 is 10, 5 times 1 is 5. So that's our fraction right there. So we're going to shade in the model of 5/10 down in the bottom here. So if we look at this 10th model down here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 bars there. So we're going to shade in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to shade in half, basically, because that's what the fraction was a half. But we would shade in 5/10. All right, so that's what that would look like. So how many tenths are shaded? Well, we have 5 of them. Remember, 1, 2, 3. You can't see that. 4 and 5. So the model shows 5 of the tenths, and if you remember decimals, it was 5/10. Remember, this place value here is the tenths. This is the hundredths. This part here, hundredths, right? And then this spot right here was the tenths. So we have 5/10 of it shaded in. So 1/2 is actually equals to 0.5, which is 5/10. Okay. And like the helpful hint says, multiplying 1/2 by 5/5 is the same as multiplying 1/2 by 1. The result is an equivalent fraction. Okay, so we still get fractions that are equal, because remember, if we said, like we did yesterday, 1/2 and 5/10, remember, if we did cross multiplication, this gives us 10, and that gives us 10. So that way we know that these are actually equal. All right, let's turn the page. All right, so we're going to use a model to write 3/4 as a fraction here. Now, as I said, we want it to have a denominator of a 10 or 100. And a lot of times, like 4 doesn't go into 10. So if the bottom number, the denominator, doesn't go into 10, we're going to have to go up to 100. So we have to decide since 4 doesn't go into 10, we're automatically know that it's going to go into 100. So we have to say, well, 4 times what equals 100? And that's how they got the 25 right here. So we have to multiply the top number by 25. So 3 times 25, and 3/4, as you hopefully know, equals 75. Okay, so this is going to be 75 over 100. So that's equivalent to 3/4. 3/4 is equivalent to 75 over 100. So we're going to shade a model of 75 over 100. So how many squares out of the 100 are shaded? Well, 75, right? 75 out of the 100 are going to be shaded. And so, we're going to say, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we know that at least that much is going to be shaded, right? All of that amount, because that's 10 times 7 of those, which is 70. And then we need to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more shaded, right? So now we have 75. So 75. So this model shows 75 hundredths. And notice how I said hundredths, 75 hundredths. Or, because remember, from this side right here, Remember, if you had a number right there, if you have two numbers, you're going to say hundredths. If you only have one number like we have here, we'd say tenths. So that's why we'd call this 75 hundredths. So the decimal value of 3/4 is 75 hundredths. And that's kind of how that is how we find those answers. So this one here in the first activity, how would it change if 1/2 was written as a fraction with a denominator of 100? Okay, so if we had this first half here, which is the half, okay, so let's say we write this as the denominator with 100. So we have 1/2 and we have a denominator of 100 right here. Well, what would we have to multiply 2 by to get to 100? Hopefully you'd see that, well, 50 times 2 is 100. So we'd have to multiply this 1 by 50, which would give us 50 over 100 there. So the numerator would be 50, and the model would show 50 shaded parts shaded, and the result, of course, is 0.50, which names the part. So again, we would still shade 50 of these out of 100. So, if we had the 100 square, it'd still be half of this would be shaded. It would just be a bunch of these little guys through here also, and it would look like that instead. So really the value of it doesn't change, but it just shows that there's an extra place value on there. Do 3/5 and 6/10 represent equivalent numbers? Well, let's look at 3/5. We need to have either a 10 or 100, and we do know 5 goes into 10, so let's use a 10. And at what times 5 do we have to multiply 5 by to get 10? Well, hopefully you see that is 2, so we have to multiply this by 2. So that's going to give us 6. And if you said that 6/10, well, obviously hopefully you'd see that this would actually be written as 6/10, because remember, this is the tens place value. So we would say 6/10 or 6/10, like that. Let's look at our practice it here on this page. So 1/4. We actually already kind of did this, because we said on this page here, remember we said, well, 4 doesn't go into 10, right? 4, you have to use 100. So we're going to have to use 100 here, if you'd remember. Okay, and we're not done when we write this fraction, by the way. I'm just using this blank. So what times 4 equals 100? Hopefully you saw that this is 25. So we got to multiply this by 25. So this gives us 25 over 100. And remember, we have to write it as a decimal. So we'd have to write it as 0. Here's our decimal now. We have to write exactly like it's written, 25 hundredths, because that's 25 out of hundreds. Remember, there's two numbers here. We would say hundredths, 25 hundredths, because that's our place value. And then we're going to shade in 25 out of the 100. So we would shade in, there's 20 right there. And then we'd shade in 5 more, which is right here. So there's 25 hundredths that we shaded in. This next one here, 3/20. Well, obviously we can't make it a 10. We have to make that 100, right? So we're going to make this 100. What times 20 equals 100? Hopefully you see that that is 5, because 20 times 5 is 100. So we got to multiply this one here by 5, which gives us 15. So we're going to shade in 15 of these to start out with. Is that 15? Yeah, that's 15. Okay. And then decimal again is 0, and then we say 15 hundredths. So 15 hundredths. There has to be two numbers there for you to call it a hundredths. 2/5. Okay. 5 will go into 10, so let's use that. All right. What times 5 equals 10? Well, hopefully you see that's 2. So we got to multiply this one up here by 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. So 4/10, we're going to shade in 4 of these 10th bars right here, like so. And since this is tenths, we only have to say 4/10, because remember, this is the tenths place value. There's only one place value there. Remember, up here you have 2 zeros, which means, let me clear this up a little because it's a little blurry. It's a little better. You have 2 zeros here, it means you have 2 spots right here. Well, this one you only have 1, so it only has 1 spot there. 3/5. 5 goes into 10. Let's use 10. What times 5 equals 10? 2. Multiply both by 2, you're going to get 6. So we're going to shade in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these, like so. Again, I don't really care about the shading too much as long as you just give it an effort. And again, there's 1 0 here, so we're going to say 0 point, and we only have one place value, 6/10. 7/10. Do we need to do anything? No, because there's already a 10 there. So they did a lot of work for us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we just shade in that right there. And again, we put a 0 and a decimal, and we only have 1 0, so we only have to put one number there, which is 7/10. 25 obviously is way more than 10, so we got to go up to 100. Okay. Well, what times 25 equals 100? Hopefully you know that that is 4. So we got to multiply this top number by 4, which gives us 32. So we would say 0 decimal. There's two numbers here, so we write 32 hundredths. And we shade in 32 out of those 100. That was a visual representation of what 32 hundredths is. Juanita practiced shooting 25 free throws at basketball practice. She made 17 of the 25 attempts. Write the fraction of the attempts made as a decimal. So she made 17 over 25. We got to write this as a decimal, again with a dot, a 0 dot, okay? It's 25, not 24. So obviously you're going to see that you're going to have to use 100 because 10 is less than that. What times 25 equals 100? 4. So we're going to multiply this 17 by 4. So you're going to have to come over here and do a little calculations. 7 times 4 is 28. Put the 2 up here. 4 times 1 is 4 plus 2 is 6. So 68 over 100, or 0.68. That is your decimal right there. Next one, Travis spent 20 minutes getting ready for school in the morning. He spent 9/20 of his time eating breakfast. Write the fraction of time as a decimal for eating breakfast, okay? So we're going to take 9/20. Obviously, you're going to have to see that we're going to put that over 100 because that's more than 10. What times 20 equals 100? Hopefully you know that that's 5. So we're going to multiply this by 5. 9 times 5 is 45. So our decimal, because it says as a decimal, we're going to write 0, and then we'll take that 4 and a 5 and put it right there, and that's our answer, 45 hundredths. What must be true about P and Q if the equation shows equivalent fractions? So if 2/5 is the same as 40 hundredths, what does that tell us? Well, hopefully you know, like if you look up here, 5 and 5, same number, 4 and 4, same number. P and Q are the same number. What property shows that 2/5 times 1 equals 40 over 100? Well, anytime you have times 1, remember that was one of those where you look in the mirror and you see your identity property. Anytime you multiply by 1 is the identity property. Write the decimal equivalent to 2/5 and 40 over 100. Well, since they're equivalent, we've already said up here they are equivalent. Well, 2/5, do that, right? We actually don't really need to do this, but we're going to anyway. We'll put this over a 10. 5 times 2 equals 10, so we're going to multiply this by 2, which gives us 4/10. Well, if we're writing this as a decimal, we can say there's 4/10, right? If we write this 40 over 100 as a decimal, we would put 40 over hundreds. So either one of these would be correct, right? Either one of those would be correct. So again, you just got to make sure that on your assignment you get everything under a 10 or 100, and then your decimal should come pretty easy because we have had this before if we have been paying attention in class. Your homework now, again, you need to, this one's already under over 10, so that's not too bad. This one we got to get over, I'll give you a hint, 100. Shade it in, and then you have to write each as a decimal. Don't just write the fraction, you got to write each as a decimal, which is like we did up here, okay? Backside, again, look at the fraction. During the first half, so you're going to look like this fraction right here. You're going to because it says write the fraction of home runs hit as a decimal, so you can write that as a decimal. Bradley hit, and I'm sorry, Bradley and his family drove to the museum. They drove 9/25 of the way and stopped for gas. Write the fraction distance traveled as a decimal. Again, as a decimal. All right, as a decimal. As a decimal. And then we have to write the decimal that is shown right here. So count those. Look how many little dots there are. Think of that to what you're going to get. Is it going to be over 100 or is it going to be over 10? That is the question. All right. So think about that as you guys are doing that. All right. If you got any questions, as always, come see me. This one's a fairly easy one, but if you do have any questions, come see me. Make sure that you staple all these together, as we always do right here in the upper end, and make sure you turn it in. Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow.